Hello lads and ladies, my name is Ickbard Matthews, and today I'm going to be discussing how the First World War on Terra and the Final World War on Terra are frighteningly similar. Welcome to Ordo Historia. But before we get into things, I'd first like to say thank you to all of you who are watching, all 10 of you. This is going to be the first video in a series where I will compare real-world history to the fictitious history of Warhammer 40k. And today we're going to be going over World War I, known as the War to End All Wars, and how it compares to the Unification Wars, which was the final war for Terra. Now, for those who object and say that the Horus Heresy disproves that fact, we will be getting into that later in the video, so please do stay tuned. To start things off, I'd like to go over what the Unification Wars were and how we got into the mess to begin with. In the far reaches of space, there was a race known as the Eldari, and according to their 2nd edition codex, this was a race that was immortal due to the fact that when they would die, they would eventually be rebirthed with all their past memories. After the war in heaven had ended, the Eldar had no real threats, and they were a bastion of technology, which made them become a more arrogant race as they unwittingly plummeted to their own undoing. The Eldari went into full depravity and created Slaanesh through full-on murder orgies, which caused her to gestate. During this gestation period, it caused warp storms to scour all across the Milky Way, which made warp travel impossible. This is the direct cause for the Age of Strife to begin for mankind. Thanks to the compilation book released by GW in 1991, we can see that the Age of Strife took place from the 26th century and ended as we started the 31st century. The Age of Strife turned the idyllic civilization of Terra into a dystopian nightmare where not only warlords were in overabundance, but they all had armies of genetically modified Techno-Barbarians. Techno-Barbarians were warriors with weapons and genetically altered bodies with no true rhyme or reason. One army could have their arms replaced with guns that killed you via nuclear hellfire, while another would be robo-spiders with a gun for each hand. The Emperor genetically modified normal humans to fight them, which created the Proto-Astartes. However, during the beginning of his conquest, he made the progenitor to the Space Marine. They were genetic freaks of nature who were made for the sole purpose of being able to violently destroy entire armies of Techno-Barbarians. Clad in Mark I power armor, these warriors wore the Emperor's lightning bolts, signifying them as Thunder Warriors. They brought havoc and destruction like no other. But there weren't just roving bands of Techno-Barbarians to contend with. There were several civilizations that made prominent footholds on Terra during the Age of Strife. There's the empire that Isaac Ahriman was born in, called the Achaemenid Empire. The borders of the Achaemenid Empire were essentially the Persian Empire's borders a long time ago. It was a civilization that avoided a majority of nuclear hellfire, leaving little to no genetic defects, and they were the first nation to join the Emperor under the banner of the Imperium. They were recruited for the Astartes program under the Thousand Sons Legion. Another example would be the country of Albia. Albia inhabited what would be the modern-day British Isles, and because of their advanced technology, like the progenitor of the Dreadnought, it actually caused a stalemate with the Emperor, who then won them over via diplomacy. A majority of the people recruited into the Astartes program would create the Dusk Raiders, while others were used to form the Night Lords and the Iron Hands respectively. If you'd like to learn more about the foundation of each legion during the Unification Wars, I highly recommend listening to Under the Hive of Madness' podcast, which has a series that goes over the foundation of the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, and Horus Heresy in depth. I will have them with all my other sources linked below, because I do not want to get H-Bomber Guide. Now that we have a good scope of understanding for the final war for Terra, let's go over our first war for it. There are 4 main causes for World War I to start, and I do literally mean main, M-A-I-N, it's an acronym. World War I was started because of militarism, allegiances, imperialism, and nationalism. Through great advances in technology, we had new weapons of war that we had no true scope of their destructive power. If it weren't for the complex weave of allegiances made between many different countries, the death of Archduke Ferdinand could have been a more isolated incident that didn't give many different nations a reason to fight. During this time as well, many different nations were going through an historical trend of imperialism where all other countries who were still developing and adopted by the more powerful country were then forced into this war as well. Finally, it was the civic pride of many people who were volunteered or eventually drafted into this war who believed their nation to be culturally and technologically superior and would win the war in a short amount of time. It was often cited that the war to end all wars was going to be over before the following Christmas. Some of you may be wondering how this relates to Warhammer, let alone the Unification Wars, and the reason is they follow a similar narrative. We have the new technology for war being created, whether it be the British land boats, which would become the tanks, Thunder Warriors with their Mark I power armor, planes with machine guns synced up with them so they didn't shoot out their own propellers, the Adeptus Astartes, or even the Browning automatic rifle, which we will be discussing about in more detail in a future video, hint hint. Both wars were renowned for creating new and lethal, devastating technology for the purpose of war. Another point in which we see great similarities between the Unification Wars and World War I is the odd mixture of old-school tactics mixed with modern-day technology. World War I is romanticized as the final war where horseback cavalry were a viable option, while we had fully automatic machine gun embankments killing everyone in no man's land with ease. We had men bayonet charging into said gun lines, while artillery from not too far off would till the soil just ahead of you, as you and your others would charge into the destroyed remnants of the enemy's ranks, only to watch several squads of infantry be wiped by chemical weaponry. Several people who play the Imperial Guard like myself or other folks who play AdMech know all too well that this is a common sight in a normal game of 4K. An interesting prospect that isn't brought up often is the ecological damage of these wars. We all assume war will have an impact that will hurt the local flora and fauna, but it's not often we see a direct correlation. Terra in the 40k timeline is an industrial hellhole with no plant life and no bodies of water, so while it may be hard to meaningfully track how they hurt the environment, we can go over the effects of the war on its primary victim, the human race. Earlier, I mentioned the Achaemenid Empire, who was known for having a strong and mostly untainted genetic code due to low radiation. The reason it maintained its reputation for having an uninfected gene pool was they joined the Imperium almost immediately and avoided having the Emperor send his Thunder Warriors and Proto-Astartes with nuclear weapons to level their entire civilization. Nuclear, biological, and conventional arms were used regularly due to the horrors of the world. If we compare to France, it was discovered entire forests where a majority of the Western Front was fought could no longer grow trees due to the high amount of copper and lead in the soil from the artillery. The artillery tilled the soil so thoroughly, the French government had decided swaths of land would be red zones that could not be lived in. It also took a multicultural biome of trees and became a monoculture. Only one type of tree survived. The rest were destroyed. Additionally, both wars had insane numbers when it came to casualties. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the total number of casualties for the United States alone was 116,516 deaths from April 6, 1917 to November 11, 1918. And I don't have to go over the fact that we weren't immediately in the trenches on April 6th. That's when we joined the war. So that number of days we actually participated is shorter, smaller. While this number may seem small, keep in mind, aside from World War II, if we tallied all the deaths from Korea to the Iraq War, the total number would still be less than the amount of people we lost in World War I. This runs perfectly parallel with the idea of how every fight in Warhammer's lore almost immediately becomes a statistic due to how violent these battles were. To this point, I must state, if you don't think that the worldwide war that suffers major casualties from things that were banned during the Geneva Convention are killing nearly endless waves of people en masse, if you don't think that's 40k, I don't know what is. And for the folks who disagree about my claim that the Unification War is the final war for Terra, my reasoning is this. Every war that was brought to Terra afterwards was never for the conquering of the planet. It was not a world war. It was a war that consumed a world, consumed an entire galaxy. The main goal and mission whenever anyone breached Terran land was to destroy the Emperor and his empire, regardless if it was on Terra, Saturn, Mercury, or Luna. The goal was the man behind it all, not the celestial body he inhabited. Thank you all for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do like and subscribe, as I have several more ideas I want to discuss with you all about how even though Warhammer 40k is far-fetched, it's surprisingly close to reality in many different ways. Thank you for watching.